Hi and welcome back to Urbcast. Today we will have a special episode because it will feature two different voices. It will not be done as a debate, but more as a presentation of a very interesting initiative from two different perspectives. This year, the Obel Award 2025 went to HouseEurope, citizen-led initiative exposing Europe's silent housing crisis and pushing for a systemic change. Their call is urgent. Stop demolishing for profit and start renovating for the people and the planet. As probably many of you know, the building sector being responsible for nearly 40% of Europe's CO2 emissions and over a third of its waste, HouseEurope shows that renovation isn't just a design choice, it's a social and environmental imperative. The Obel Award, presented annually by the Henrik Frode Obel Foundation, honors architecture's potential to create real and positive change in the world. This prize is not about the aesthetics, it's not about the visual aspect of the architecture, but it is about the action, about the initiative that is changing the status quo. So in this episode, I first speak with Enlai Hooi, who's the head of innovation at Schmidt Hammer Lassen Architects and also a part of the HouseEurope initiative. We'll talk about the initiative itself and the urgency of the retrofit housing topic. Then I will be joined by Anne-Marie Gernstrup, who's the founder of Gernstrup Architects and Obel Award jury member, to hear why the jury chose HouseEurope for this year's prize. And together we'll discuss how architecture can help transform Europe's built environment and why now is the time to act. Welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast. Enlai, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Martin. It's been some time, but I've been looking forward to speaking with you again.
It's been some time indeed, but I feel like the topic of today's discussion is something that you have been working with for some time already. And Anne-Marie, in the first part of this conversation, she said that we should start thinking about the building waste almost as a food waste, because there was like this big transition in thinking about the food waste and a lot of action lately as well. But what is your approach to retrofit, to building waste? And we will also discuss the HouseEurope as well. But how did you get interested in the topic personally?
Well, I think it's very right to discuss the awareness level of what the amount of waste, if you like, that the building industry is producing through demolition and also through the construction that follows. So there's waste in both areas. But if you were to look at European-wide statistics, the biggest, and actually worldwide statistics, the biggest proportion of solid waste that we produce as a society is building rubble, which is really strange because we would expect buildings to last a very long time and therefore be a small proportion of the waste that we produce as a society. But it's actually one of the largest. The only thing that would maybe trump that in terms of volume is food waste. But if you're talking about solid waste, the stuff that sticks around, the building industry demolition is number one. And that contributes to a large proportion, also the embodied carbon that gets disposed of or wasted, which it's becoming more and more because building lifespans are getting shorter. So now in a building lifespan in Denmark, you would expect embodied carbon to be about 50% of the carbon load of a building. And that 50% is actually wasted when you demolish a building.
You're working in Denmark for many years. Do you find it more progressive than other European countries if it comes to the retrofit and building waste agenda?
More than some and less than others. I think the Benelux region, especially the Netherlands and Belgium, have had a very proactive approach, and I think they've led. Denmark is not far behind, and I think the reason for the dramatic shift in consciousness that I think we've seen in the past 2 years in Denmark has been based on an awareness of embodied carbon, not necessarily awareness of volumes of waste, toxicity, social upheaval, etc. But nevertheless, that is coming to the fore in people's attention right now. I've been working on this topic for about 4 years, quite a dedicated way, but I've seen a massive change in the last 2 years.
Could you tell us a bit more about HouseEurope and how you became part of it?
Well, I became part of it through teaching connections. My wife actually was the main connection through to lecturers or a chair, if you like, at the ETH in Zurich, where this whole thing started. But I would say that more tangentially, I became part of the HouseEurope group through the activism that I've been doing in the talks that I've been having about transformation. But more importantly, I think it's to understand what HouseEurope is. It's a non-profit, impact-based organization and policy lab, which looks at European law as being a lever for action in the member states and a way of raising awareness and transforming the debate around transformation's impact on the built environment and climate in general.
And how long are you operating so far?
An ECI is what's called a European Citizens Initiative, and that's been developed, I would say, relatively recently in the history of European governance. And that is that it's a tool for direct democracy, which means that any citizen in Europe can raise an issue that needs to be brought before Parliament. And if they get a million signatures across a range of different countries with minimum thresholds, which is quite a hard thing to achieve, then the European Commission and Parliament is obliged to build a special inquiry or a group that will research and tackle this issue and bring it for vote in the European Parliament.
So you need 1 million signatures. How many do you have so far, and what's the deadline?
Honestly, I haven't checked how many we have at the moment, but the deadline is the end of January 2026. The voting period lasts for 1 year.
So there is still some time, and I'm also obviously encouraging the listeners to check this initiative and put your own signature under it, because this is something that will oblige the European Union to look into this issue and create some sort of a task force, which might lead to some changes in legislation, which is very needed.
Yes, so changes in legislation have an extraordinary effect on culture. There are certain things that at a European level you can legislate for, and certain things that only in a member state you can legislate for. But what we've done as a group is consulted the right, if you like, lawyers and policy experts to find out what the levers are that could change policy in each member country. But there's another thing about this, and that is that even voting in each member state is a great way of gathering evidence for how much a population of each country supports transformation rather than demolition. That's really important, because when you vote, it's very quick. It takes around, I think, minimum 20 seconds. And you can actually vote by going to the HouseEurope website, and there's a direct link that says, sign here. You sign up with your government identification so that when you're signing, that's hard evidence that this is supported, and it's difficult for politicians to deny that evidence. So in any country where you sign, I think this is important for local politics as well as the European level.
Speaking of the website, I was just looking at it, preparing, and there is a clear statement: yes to renovation, no to demolition, and also some of the big issues that demolition brings. So basically, these are the social issues connected to the home loss, but also ecological issue connected to the energy loss, economic with the job loss, and the cultural issue with the memory loss. So you propose some of the solutions, but how to fix it? So basically, renovating safe homes, renovating saves energy, renovating saves jobs, and renovation saves history. But how can it be collectively done if we are discussing so many different countries and a long legislation process?
Well, I mean, there's three pillars basically to the policy. One is to ease the relative cost burden for renovation to be done through incentives or tax. Another one is to look at renovation and the blockages you get in industry, because engineers, for example, get a lot of liability risk when they approve something for transformation, even if they know absolutely that it's going to stand up. There's no standards. And because there's no standards, then they can't point to anything and say, we did the right thing. So actually having standards is probably I would say, most powerful. And the third one is a harmonization of standards with regards to embodied carbon calculation. And that's because all of the systems of measuring carbon assume that there's nothing on the site before you begin. So you start with A1, which is extraction of materials in an LCA calculation. But what if there's already all of this energy there? How do you calculate that? And so having a pre-A1, maybe an A0, will allow you to value what carbon that's been spent in the past is already in the building and see that as a quality.
As you said, the legislation and the regulation in each of the respective countries of Europe, it is quite a lengthy process, and there is some risk connected to that as well. You said, about the engineers being risk averse because there might be this big responsibility, right? So how can one do it on an even bigger level? So we are discussing here, like HouseEurope, we are discussing the pan-European level. So is the aim is that there would be a pan-European law that would operate the same in different countries?
That's the point, is that we have crafted policies that will even the playing field across countries. And the idea is that each country is obliged to implement them in their own law, but a European level policy has to be implemented by each country, and it has to be implemented in an equitable way so that you can't dodge it, if you like, by going to another country. And that's really important, because once Europe comes on board, we find it with GDPR laws, we find it with in insecticides, we find it with many things that have passed through this process. Once it goes through European law and has the, if you like, the critical mass of Europe behind it, it filters very quickly to the rest of the world.
I wonder how much time such a change can take, because back to the food waste discussion, it was maybe like 5-10 years where we shifted our mindset. Not everyone, of course, but we had a lot of discussion about it, had some legislation, and we also had some organizations or firms like Too Good To Go, like actively operating in many European cities and many European countries. How much time could such a process take for building waste discussion?
There's two things that happen when you do an activism like this, which is influential in law. One of it is the official path, which is the legal and political approach. Once something becomes law, it's amazing how quickly people see this as being the natural way to operate, which is wild. Top-down is very powerful. So like when smoking laws come in, everybody thinks it's crazy and things will never change and it won't happen and they can't adapt. And within a couple of months, it seems like they've always done it that way. The same thing with recycling, the same thing with any law that comes across society. It's incredible how quickly society adapts. And I heard a research about what counts as tradition, and if a community does things 3 years in a row, they somehow believe that they've always done it. And so law and tradition become very closely intertwined. And so that's why, and it's very powerful. Secondly, in parallel to the legal thing, it's the activism itself and the coordination of people in these different states across Europe, that whether or not it becomes law, it becomes part of culture. And the ECI, or the way of creating this legal change, is actually galvanizing people from different groups across Europe with the same intention, the same frustrations, the same goals, and we're too afraid to actually bring it up. And that's powerful as well, because you find that it is risky if I say, I don't want to build so much anymore being an architect in my firm. Same if you're an engineer or a constructor. But if you say there's a movement, it gives you strength, and you can be part of that movement without necessarily, let's say, endangering your own job by supporting it.
It's an interesting one, because the role of architects is something that inevitably gets discussed while we discuss retrofitting or building less even. And Anne-Marie also addressed that architects must design buildings for longevity and adaptability and also future reuse. So screws, not glue. Do you think that it actually is like an optimistic thing for architects that we discussed the retrofit? Will it be more jobs around retrofitting? So can architects, be calm, and will they still have jobs?
Absolutely. In fact, switching from new build to retrofit represents a net surplus in work for architects especially and engineers. And that is because the amount of time it takes for an architect to design a huge multi-story development is very little compared to the amount of time it would take an architect to design the same amount of units, if you like, as a retrofit. And that's super clear because when you're doing new build, it's highly formulaic. It's very copy-paste. It takes very little intellectual time to do that kind of thing. Yet, there's this fear in the industry that if we stop building so much new stuff that we'd run out of work. It would be quite the opposite. We would have so much more work for so many more actors. And that folds back into not just the consultancy side, the architects and the engineers, but also the local economy in general. Because when you build new, what happens is you're essentially spending, statistics say 70% of the money by buying products that essentially come from all over the world. And most of the money in those products is about extracting them out of the earth. You spend money actually digging stuff out of the earth. That doesn't produce very good jobs. It produces shitty jobs at low wages, loads of environmental problems. Then you have to ship them over and then put them together in a factory, which produces more pollution, and then you put it on site. That's where the money goes when you build new. But the majority of money, even if transformation, it costs the same for the same amount of square meters, the money stays very local and it's in much more highly skilled jobs and it gets spent more locally. And so less goes into extraction and more goes into the local economy. So money is worth more if you transform, but it also creates more jobs.
So you basically saying that there is a clear case, financial case, and not only, but also in terms of the community building case, the climate case, for retrofitting instead of building and bringing all the materials from all over the world.
Absolutely. The only organizations that really stand to lose are the massive ones that do things copy-paste with pro formas. And that's like equity investors that when they build, they have so much money and they need such guaranteed returns that they build thousands of units the same way because they don't care about how much you can make on each building. They care about how much you can make in over thousands of buildings. And they don't have the intellectual time or energy to actually treat a building carefully. So yes, much more money stands to be made for the same amount of value with transformation. But just like energy, where it's cheaper to provide 1 kilowatt hour through solar than it is through nuclear or through coal or anything else, because solar energy, the money is made in a distributed way by lots of small actors. That's why, governments, that's why big industry doesn't want it. And it's the same with transformation. Big industry is very happy with new build, not because you make more or you produce more value, but because you can concentrate the wealth.
And speculate. And I think this is also one of the things you address as HouseEurope, that the speculation should be erased.
A lot of the speculation is due to the fact that big money, which is generally things like pension funds, hedge funds, equity investment, that sort of thing, can't or doesn't want to deal with the nuance of individual buildings. They want to do things in a massive way with a simple formula. And that means that they're not putting their money into transformation, even if on a building by building case, it could be cheaper or better or more valuable per square meter. It really doesn't matter. Speculation is really after total net gains done as easily as possible. And they see risk in difference and they see risk in nuance. And so there are two kinds of speculation that you might say are addressed by transformation. One is knocking down to build new. And the other one is basically buying up properties that already exist so that you can renovate and then jack up the price, essentially. And that's how companies like Blackstone work, famous for basically kicking people out of the properties that they've lived in for many years by being a new owner. So we're aware, and it's important to understand that not all renovation is actually good. What we want to focus on is the stuff the buildings, if you like, that are not any longer that are vacant, that are not any longer being used for the purpose that they were built for. So things like offices, retail, commercial, when you turn those into residential, that it doesn't take away. But in our policies, we're very clear that we have to be anti-speculation by renovation. And when we're talking about that, when we're not saying, that these companies are increasing the architectural quality or the value, they're essentially just putting new security, new locks on the front doors, and new windows to enable them legally to charge as much as possible. And we have policy guidance that will stop that from happening as well. It's not just a financial thing. The idea is that when a building goes down in a city, all of the memories, all of the relationship you have with that city block, that kind of gets erased. And even if a building is not loved, let's say, for example, you've got a building that people consider ugly, to demolish it basically causes, if you like, a vacancy and a lack of people, a lack of activity, a lack of life, and an increase in pollution in that part of the city for years. And instead, if you transform that building, you might go for something that was not loved to something that is loved, that is fantastic, that is interesting, that is beautiful. And that changes people's perspective about the potential of the city itself. So I think that's really important to think of mundane, boring, shitty, unloved buildings as being potential for something that's more interesting and more fantastic.
I love this notion of embodied culture. This is something that I think we should discuss more. Lastly, I would love to ask you about the Obel Award, because HouseEurope was awarded the Obel Prize this year, and I think that what was recognized was especially this kind of tangible and activism lab, which empowers the citizens. But back to you, as a member of HouseEurope, what did such a prize mean to you as an organization?
The prize is extremely valuable. I mean, there's money, but that's not really the valuable thing. What's really valuable is that the Obel Award is recognized for seeking impact as being its primary driver. At least that's what I understand. And we need this kind of recognition because that's precisely what the entire organization is about. The organization came together mainly because architects ourselves were frustrated by the industry that we find ourselves making money in. We saw that there was a dramatic sort of what you would call cognitive dissonance, if you like, between what we wanted to do in the world and make positive impact and what we were actually being paid to do. And that frustration led to some research to say, okay, what could be better? What could be more profitable, more interesting as designers, better for the environment and less wasteful? And of course, transformation is clearly the answer. And that instead of demolition. So the award is important because it allows us to validate what we know is true in our hearts, and it allows us to speak about it in a better way.
And thank you very much for that. Thank you for being in Urbcast for the second time. And I hope that next time we meet, there will be a big progress, maybe even some legislation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure speaking with you again.
That was the conversation with Enlai, and now let's move to London from Copenhagen, where we discuss with Anne-Marie Gernstrup, the founder of Gernstrup Architects and Obel Award jury member. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Could you just introduce yourself very shortly?
So I'm Anne-Marie Gernstrup. I'm the director of Gernstrup Architects. We're a small practice based in London. We're specialized in culture and community projects. Small practice, 10 people. I'm Danish, and I've studied here, and was back in Copenhagen for a while, but now set up a practice here.
In the beginning of this year, you also started a very interesting venture because you became the part of the jury for Obel Awards. Can you tell us something more about how did it start and why did you decide to join?
Well, I was approached very kindly and asked if that was something I would be interested in, and that was very big opportunity and very nice and an honor to be part of the Obel Award. I am the newest member. I can't keep saying that, but and it's extremely interesting. I think the Obel Award are doing wonderful things and they have wonderful initiatives. And for me, it's always been how it was grown and set up was all about this is much more than beauty. This is about making social change and going a little bit beyond what's there. And I think that's extremely valuable to have as an award. So it's not only about the pretty buildings we do, but the whole kind of impact they have on the wider society, which is really, I suppose, what in my opinion, we are put in the world to do as architects. So it's a huge honor to become part of the Obel Award.
I think we have enough of those different prizes that are given mostly for the visual aspects of the buildings of different projects, and we should focus more on the impact. You've mentioned the social impact, and I feel like this is something that Obel Awards is actually doing, especially that one of the prizes was given to the 15-minute city concept by Carlos Moreno some years ago. So this tells you a lot about the ambition and the motivation as well. How did you find it when you yourself started to be one of the jury members?
I think what's very interesting with Obel Award, as you say, it's not picking a star architect that we all know from the magazine and then giving them more awards. It's also picking maybe a little bit odd one out or somebody who's doing something special, who needs a little bit support to take the next step, or who's making impact, as you say, on a wider scale and another scale. I think the other thing that's really interesting about the Obel Award is that there's a theme set. So there's a theme that comes out, and this year, obviously, ready-made. I was not part of setting up the theme for that, but part of selecting the winner of that. And I think that's extremely valuable because it also makes it a little bit more interesting also to be a jury member, because you have these wonderful discussions with some very skilled people and very knowledgeable people, the jury members, about what's going on. It's quite international as well, the group of people, and from different disciplines within architecture. So it's a very flavored, wonderful conversations that's happening as part of both the creation of the theme, but also in selecting then what we understand that theme could be. So I think that's something that's very special about the Obel Award, that there is this theme that goes with it, that also then kind of guides you a little bit in how you select. But then again, everybody has different opinions and interpretations. So it's wonderful conversations, I have to say.
It's not a secret who was the winner this year, as this is probably something that we'll put in the episode's description, so people will already know. So we will not disclose too much when we say that it was HouseEurope. And I was wondering, what was your motivation? So how was this initiative embodying the ready-made concept?
HouseEurope, I think, what was wonderful about architecture is that it's a passion that can and profession that can take you in so many directions, yeah? And I think the whole kind of responding to a situation, rather than maybe, a beautiful building, whether it's the context or a community or society, I think that's very much what HouseEurope does, yeah? They're kind of, it's a movement, it's of a pressing issue that we have today. They're creating an awareness, which is extremely important, that people start just to have a little bit wider awareness, so that retrofit becomes the norm, just as food waste are becoming the norm and has become the norm. And I think also with the initiatives that they're acting against, it's all about implementation. It's about cases. We can do it. It's not the academic exercise of, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did so and so? It's actually they're going out and making real change by putting in policies to actually make the implementation happen. I know you're based in Denmark, and I think Denmark is forefront in many of retrofit projects, which is great. But there's also sometimes you need quite a lot of economy behind these retrofit projects that might not be available in other countries. So I think, like here in the UK, the tax system, for example, you don't get tax exempt for doing retrofit, but you do for new build. So it's not very attractive for developers, and certainly not for the big developers. So for me, something like what HouseEurope are doing, turning the big dial, right, let's change the policy, really could have an impact, not only on the country you're in, but on the wider, and that's what we need to do, obviously, with climate change. We're not isolated in locally where we are.
Housing is such a huge topic nowadays, and this is not only due to the lack of housing, but this overall huge housing inaccessibility and lack of affordability, because more and more in our cities, in our European cities, I mean, London is a great example as well, we have a lot of empty apartments that are invested into due to like pure speculation. So there is like a huge challenge in housing in general. How is HouseEurope through the retrofit agenda answering that?
I think what the other thing they're doing with the policies is also that social change you have in your cities. Yeah, when you put in new build and people have to move out or they can't afford where they are. So I think it's I think also with this award is also kind of celebrating the diversity of neighborhoods, right? It's celebrating what good public realm is also having a variety in your neighborhood, and that's not only in what it looks like and having different times and styles, is also the people that live there. There's from different generations and different backgrounds, and not all from the same class or system. Yeah, I think that's tremendously important, in particularly in bigger cities, to maintain that. And I think with retrofit, hopefully some of that you'll have to react to something, you'll have to react to what's there, and it's more likely that you can keep some of that flavors of your neighborhood, and hopefully also a little bit of the society and neighborhood of people that's there.
In terms of the retrofit itself, like, do you believe that choosing HouseEurope and similar initiatives will allow to retrofit be more part of a mainstream architecture?
I think that's extremely important, that it becomes part of it. I think both in the way we become more aware as architects. So when we do build new, we make good quality things and structures that can be retrofitted later on. Yeah. And that we start advocating to our clients and that why is this important? Because if you want this to last for not for 20 or 50 years, but for 100 years, you might want to choose this instead. And you do have to maintain what you're putting up. So I think it's not only retrofit, it's also how then, if you are making new, how can you make sure you can take it apart and put it back in new constellations. So it's what is it? Screws, no glue, isn't that what they say? And just being aware of that. And then as with, it just needs to become the norm that this is how we think before we throw away. With as we do with food waste, I think that we become really good at that, but we're not really doing it in our industry yet, because of the financial hurdle that it's cheaper to build new sometimes, right? And I think that's one of the big things that HouseEurope is campaigning against, and I think that's really worth. I think also it's wonderful to have a European movement, more countries go together, and I think what really would be wonderful is if that could also be a learning example, or that they could go abroad, or there's some of these methods that it's not only about Europe, but these initiatives could happen in other continents in the world. We can make real impact. Think about all the big developers in the Middle East. If they really turned the dial on retrofit rather than everything having to be new build, I mean, that would have huge impact. When China, that's a completely different type of impact than just talking about what you're doing with your extension in your backyard.
Sustainable urban regeneration and transformation is definitely such a fascinating topic, and I think we should have more and more of that in our cities, instead of building somewhere on the green land, somewhere far from the city center. But as you said, like, sometimes it is just cheaper, and money money is extremely important aspect. So I wonder, how can designers, urbanists, architects find themselves and still push for more retrofit, even though it might be not the most financially appealing option as of now?
You need to dare to take the questions with your clients. So you need to be able to say, well, or give them the option and tell them how it's possible. Yeah. So I think one thing is the whole, as I talked about before, that you know how you're designed to make sure it can be retrofit later. But I think also the whole, how you can retrofit, but yeah, the whole, challenge your clients. I mean, take it forward. But I think, and that's back to suppose what was the essence of giving the award to something that's actually a policy rather than a building. Yeah. And in a way, I think that goes back to celebrating planners. And I think we forget a little bit what planners actually do for our cities and how hard they work with, influence politicians and with economies and driving all of those forward. Yeah. And I think we forget sometimes what that means. Yeah. And I think that's why, for example, that the award being given as a policy is tremendously strong rather than being given to a project, if that makes sense.
From your own perspective and you as a leader of your own office, how does this discussion, how this recognition of HouseEurope influences the role of architects? So do you think that there will be less and less, so to say, commercial architects, and there will be more rather consultants that will be working with regeneration?
I think it's already happening, isn't it? I think it's already happening that there are more retrofit projects and more asks for retrofit projects coming out there. So I think it is becoming more, the norm in our profession that this is the route to take. I think public clients are becoming far more educated or aware of it. And they also need to kind of show it's part of their sustainability agenda. I mean, we work a lot with the public and with the culture and heritage sector. So the retrofit becomes quite at the norm because that you're in a historic fabric. So you're working with what you got. So then in that sense, it's more about let's not build something new because we can actually use what we got if we reorganize it and maybe get better use of the square meters you have and what's there. And maybe that's the same thing that you can take not only in historic buildings, but also into your public realm you can do more infill, you can actually use empty space, you can get more out of your plots with what's there. So we don't, to encourage that, I suppose.
In the press note, we can read that there is a quote: every minute a building in Europe is destroyed, not by natural disasters, but by financial speculation. So HouseEurope calls for teaching this thinking of speculation and thinking about the kind of real value for the citizens instead. What impact, basically, do you hope this recognition will have? So do you think that such a recognition for HouseEurope can start a wider debate on Europe's housing and construction crisis or anything else?
I mean, that's the aim, isn't it? That ultimately is what happened. I mean, it's a process, right? And it's going to be a very long process for such things to happen and for people to understand the impact that this will have. Yeah. So I think you need to encourage these movements who is willing to take that long journey, to push things like this forward. And then, yes, it's going to take time before actually, the local user will understand the value of it, but also that I think the big developers can see the value. And I think that's definitely what, for example, as we talked about with tax relief on retrofit is a huge thing that could come in and support.
That's one of the solutions, but this is definitely something that is quite complex as well, and it differs from country to country. So would you have also some sort of recommendation to the people in the field, to the architects, designers, especially to the young ones? What would be your kind of, advice for them to start?
I think it's already there. I think it's something that certainly the people we get into the practice, it's something that's already kind of very much aware, far more than when I came out in practice. I think it's something that we all have a duty to take forward. I think it's something that we need to also learn to see what the qualities of our buildings and what we have, and also have that kind of find that strong interest in, for example, heritage and what actually can we reuse, and take that forward and celebrate that, if that makes sense. And if we're taking something down, how can we reuse it again? I think the material bank and the raw structure we have, I think that's more and more becoming a pressing issue or a pressing topic, and encouraging that and always question, could we not and what if? And then I think get your QS on board. I think that's extremely important. It's not only your client, it's also getting your engineer and your QS and your whole team around the project on board, so so that, for example, the economical calculations can be made. Why, is this beneficial, not only now, but long term?
That's the call back to the impact, back to the hope, and that I was asking you about, whether this nomination, this prize for HouseEurope can spark some discussion.
I think the discussion is happening. I think the action needs to happen as well. You can't just sit in academia or back in the office and talk about it. You need to go out and start actually actively working with it. And I think that's the big thing that HouseEurope with the policies can start change, because we don't have all the developers on board this, and all the investors are not on board it. So even the cities can't just demand it. Yeah. So I think the system needs to also change, if that makes sense. And again, that is what HouseEurope is encouraging, that conversation is actually in action. Yeah, we're doing it, and they're taking forward very cleverly examples of how it's done. So we're not sitting there and speculating about it, but actually, no, there's that example here and there that you can look at, and that's how it works. And expanding that, and I think we need to do it, go out and do it, and not just talk about it.
Thanks a lot, Anne-Marie, for joining me on Urbcast.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. And if you find it interesting, please share it with someone that also might like it. I hope you enjoyed this two-voice episode. And if you would like to have more of this type of episodes, just let me know in the email or in the comments under YouTube or Spotify episode. Thanks, and talk to you soon.